Hello everyone, and welcome to the Telegraph Sports Business Summit Esports panel. My name's Miles Jacobson and I run the studio behind the Football Manager series of games. So for those who don't know what esports is, it's competitive video gaming. While sports games such as FIFA and to a tiny degree my own Football Manager are played as esports, the main titles are team-based fighting, card and war games, all of which have lots of strategy, such as Counter-Strike Go, League of Legends, Dota 2, Smite and Hearthstone. They might be new names for some of the people here, but they're not for those of us in gaming. For too long, Asia has been the focus, with esports regularly shown on primetime TV in Korea and stadium sellouts where people watch their heroes play their favourite games. But that's all changing. According to Superdata, the total worldwide market for esports this year will reach $910 million and is expected to reach $1.3 billion in 2019. Now, whilst you might have visions of a teenage boy who doesn't leave his room in your head as the typical esports fan, people forget that the average age of gamers now is 36. The average household income of an esports fan is close to $100,000 a year. They don't just watch games at home. Like in Asia, there are now huge events, including sellouts at Wembley Arena and the Staples Centre. Just last week, West Ham United signed their first esports player to their squad. He's been given squad number 50, and he'll represent West Ham in future FIFA Sports tournaments. Schalke are also taking it so seriously that they've bought a spot for one of their esports players in a forthcoming League of Legends tournament. Wolfsburg and Besiktas also have their own esports players, and you can expect a lot more announcements like this in the next 12 months. Sky Sports recently broadcast a FIFA soccer tournament, enlisting the help of a YouTuber called Spencer FC for the broadcast. You may not have heard of Spencer FC, but he has more YouTube followers than the majority of top-tier football clubs, with over 1.5 million subscribers on that platform alone. For today's panel, I'm joined by some of the most important players in the business of esports. Jonathan Hall is the Chief Operating Officer at Gfinity, who opened their first UK dedicated esports studio in March 2015 in West London. Since then, they've staged over 35 live events across a range of titles on PC, console and mobile devices. James Dean is Managing Director of ESL UK, the UK arm of the biggest esports company in the world. They have 400 employees across 9 offices, have hosted nearly 400 events with $15 million paid out in prize money to date, including 2 $1 million tournaments for Dota 2. They run leagues for most of the largest games publishers and stream content in 29 languages with a peak concurrent viewers of 2 million for the Katowice 2016 tournament. Chris Mead is Director of EMEA Partnerships at Twitch TV, the #1 place to watch esports streams in the world, who were recently bought by Amazon for a tiny amount of $1 billion. Hello.
Hello.
So I'm guessing, can I just have a show of hands? Who is well aware of esports and what's going on, and who's new to it? So who's well aware? Okay. Wow, that's quite good. Yeah. I can cross out a couple of these there. So one of the key things that I've found when I'm discussing esports with people in the sports industry is that, as I mentioned in the intro, they all think it's just 14-year-old spotty boys in their bedrooms sitting there watching people playing computer games because they've had their own PlayStations taken away because they've been bad at school. But we know that's not the case. So the demographic of the audience is obviously very important to sponsors. So start from an ESL perspective. What are you finding regarding the demographics of the audience at the moment?
Age-wise, 18 to 24, that's the majority. What we find, they live online. They don't respond to traditional media, advertising or any particular things that are thrown at them, really. they live in social media, they live on Twitch. We've been going for 20 years. Really, this phenomenon has come out of the fact that we've been able to reach this audience online. So I would say it really spans from the perspective, it's a young audience, but they're certainly professionals as well, and online.
And with the Gfinity events, are you starting to see people wanting season tickets to them, or does it change for the different events?
It does change by game, so you do get a slightly different profile for each of the individual games. I think people think of esports as a sport. I would compare esports to sport as a whole, and then within esports you'll have Counter-Strike will have its own audience, and League of Legends will have its own audience, and so will games like Dota. And there's some overlap, as there are, a sports fan might be a huge fan of rugby, cricket and so on. So there's some overlap between them, but people will tend to have their one or two that they really sort of hone in on, that they watch. I think the thing I'd pull out around the demographic, I think people do get quite quickly that it's a young male audience. I think they also understand very quickly that these people are living online, as you say, and what they're not doing is watching conventional TV so much. So they consume their media via the likes of Twitch. I think the other point to make is that this is very mainstream. For those of us, I'm in my late 30s now, people my age and above, I think there's a perception that the people who are into competitive video gaming were the nerdy group in school who didn't have so many friends and who sit around sort of playing games rather than going out. And that's not the case. I think the reason people like this is that it's so social. So at the same time people are watching, they're talking with their friends. They all play these games now. They play these games more than they typically watch TV. And so I think people are sort of getting their head around now that this is not a sort of small niche nerdy demographic. It's incredibly mainstream. It's what the cool kids in school and as they go on to university in their careers now do.
And what percentage of the audience that are coming along to the live events are female? It's
actually slightly higher than the percentage that play. I would say between 10 and 15% of those who come to our live events are female. Of those who are actually playing regularly online, it's between 5 and 10%. So it is still, there are women involved. In terms of people who play video games, there's lots of women involved. They tend to be more involved in the titles that aren't huge esports titles at the moment. But yeah, there are, it is a male-focused demographic.
And do you think we'll get to the stage where a game like Candy Crush Saga could actually be played as an esport?
I think we will definitely get to the point where things we think of as casual games now develop followings, whether it's Candy Crush or whether it's another fun, casual kind of social game. It's really difficult to predict which games will fly. I mean, certain games have become incredibly prominent this year, like Rocket League, which I would never have called if we were sitting here a year ago. So it is incredibly difficult to predict. I think whether it's Candy Crush or not, I couldn't tell you, but I think some of those games will definitely come to the fore.
Chris?
Yeah. John's very much on point with a lot of his points. To give you a little bit of insight as to the Twitch audience, it is predominantly ages 18 to 34. It is male-dominated, but actually we found last year that 25% of our audience now is female, and that is reflected within an esports audience as well. In terms of our audience, they're very tech savvy. You can consider them cord cutters in that sense. Accessibility to content is extremely important to our audience. You can talk about how our audience are moving away from TV. Well, I think it's essentially a redefinition of TV altogether, right? When you talk about accessibility in devices like Roku, Amazon Fire, and so forth, our audience is increasingly watching Twitch on those platforms now.
I'm one of those as well. I watch Twitch on my telly at home.
Cool.
So, we have one thing that the sports industry has noticed is that the amount of younger people going to live sporting events is actually falling a little bit, and I think that's partly because of the pricing and partly because it's just sold out. You can't get a ticket for most Premier League games. Do you find that the audiences who are coming to watch esports are sports fans, or are they purely esports fans? Do they go to both live sporting events and live esports events, or are they just going to esports and avoiding traditional sports entirely?
There's certainly a decent proportion of them that are sports fans. When you talk to them, they are interested in conventional sport. Whether that translates to them regularly going to sports events, I think that generation at the moment are typically moving away from being a season ticket holder at a lot of conventional sports. They like a lot of flexibility. They like to consume lots of different types of media. They like to go to lots of different types of events. So whether their passion for conventional sport, if you want to call it that, translates to actually physically attending traditional sports events, I'd say probably not so much in my experience.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider esports a sport, right? So it's almost like asking, does somebody who watches football watch tennis? The answer, the likelihood is yes, right? And the same can be said with esports. John made a very good distinction. I think, when you're looking at esports, you should actually really look at the titles themselves.
Yeah.
As it's not one sport. It's really different games within it that make up that sport. But yes, absolutely, I would consider myself one of them as well. I watch football, enjoy football, but I watch and appreciate video games and the competitive sides of video games as well.
I'm still blaming you for the bus at West Ham.
I think if we look at some of our own stadium events and look at the demographic and what they're trying to look for by attending, they're looking for an out-of-house experience. It takes a lot of effort to go and attend an event. Our largest one will have 110,000 people over a weekend.
Wow. Now,
if you look at, I think a lot of those would be sports fans. So what they're looking for is what that experience is, and it has to be a very modern experience, full of social media. And when I've attended sports events now, there is a huge amount of exterior in terms of entertainment that you get out of that match day. That 1 hour match or 1.5 hour match is much more. It's your travel, your experience, your social media build-up, and it's the whole story afterwards and your story on your own social media. So I would say it's the experience that really drives that. So if there is a sports fan within the esports demographic, then yes, they're looking to have that experience. Whether they go to a stadium or not is what that experience offers.
And the people who are coming to the events, what I've noticed this season a lot more in football is flares and smoke bombs in stadiums. Do you have that problem in the arenas?
We have clappers.
You have clappers?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're from Leicester, so the clappy Premier League team.
People like to really show whose side they're on. And there actually is a recent study about a discussion about whether the noise the fans make does actually help the sports gamers themselves.
Or does it put them off?
Or does it put them off? Either way. A really good example of this is the coloured wristbands. I love this because you have two sides of a stadium and you have a reversible wristband that lights up. We usually work in a dark environment, so the stage is dark and it's lit up with all sorts of colours and effects, etc. So you imagine half the audience have got a red band, but you can reverse it to blue. And as the day transitions, you'll find that the sort of stadium fills with different colours. And that's kind of how the audience will try and sort of, in a mass way, show who they're supporting. And it's really nice to see that.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that point, behaviour of supporters within the stadium is really not too dissimilar to what you see in a traditional sports stadium. I think one example that really kind of exemplified it was when I was in Turkey, in Istanbul, and you mentioned Besiktas has a League of Legends team, and the League of Legends tournament filled out at the Volkswagen Arena in Istanbul, I think, which holds around 8,000 people. And Besiktas actually won the event, but during the entire tournament, these young kids, these young millennials were chanting Besiktas football chants. Mm-hmm. So they were bringing that from the football stadium. And these kids, they may be Galatasaray fans, Fenerbahce fans, but because of their affinity to the game and understanding and recognition of a major sports team actually picking up players, they got on the bandwagon, and that was great publicity for Besiktas at the same time.
Absolutely. Which brings us neatly on to,
great.
the new trends that are evolving in esports. But I mentioned before the West Ham deal last week. I know of a couple of other Premier League clubs who are talking to people at the moment and other sports clubs as well. So, what are the new trends that are involving in esports with things like the sponsorship, but in other areas as well, Chris?
It's definitely, I think you're seeing sports clubs now pick up esports players. I think they want to touch base with the younger millennial audience. I think one key trend that I've noticed over the last year is really kind of the stadiumification of esports. If you look at esports back in 2006, 2008, I think everybody was happy if there were 50 plastic chairs in an arena for people to sit on. Now we're talking about filling up stadiums like the Staples Center, Wembley Arena, Madison Square Garden. These arenas are actually being filled up and tickets are being sold. So it's very common now to see that, and people expect it almost. So,
how quickly did Wembley sell out?
That was 4 minutes, I think.
That was for League of
Something
Legends,
like
right?
that. Yeah.
So that's 4 minutes to sell out Wembley Arena.
Yeah.
And that was a couple of years ago. So
It is. I think the way I'd characterise it is the audience has been there for a few years now, but I think where we are now is we're at quite a tipping point in terms of more mainstream acceptance from broadcasters, from sponsors, from existing sports organisations, that this is a big thing. It's part of a change in the way in which younger people consume media, and that it is here to stay. And we're finding from all those different channels, lots of people now starting to look to get involved. So you mentioned an interesting stat around the size of the sort of the commercial revenues involved in esports, that are around 900 million. But if you look at the stats, Newsy will tell you there's something in the region of 335 million esports enthusiasts globally at the moment. So that's a little under $3 a fan. Now, if you equate that to a conventional sport, that would typically be somewhere between $20 and $50 a fan.
Yeah.
So the size of the market commercially at the moment relative to the size of the audience is still small.
So get in now, brands.
And I think
get in now while it's cheap.
if I had to characterise where brands, where broadcasters and teams are, they all want to get involved. They all know esports is big. They're not entirely sure how to get involved. So we're getting a call every week at the moment from a brand saying, we want to be involved in esports. But my background's in conventional sport. I spent the last 5 years before esports as finance director at Saracens Rugby. And it's a much more tortuous sales process now, because people know they want to be involved in esports, but they don't really know what that means in practice, how they want to be involved. Do they want to sponsor an existing tournament? Do they want you to create something bespoke that appeals to their audience? They think of esports as one thing in itself, whereas you've got to pick what game they want to go into. So we're doing an enormous amount of education for brands who know they want to be involved, but don't quite know how they want to be involved yet. So I think we're sort of just at the start of that journey of really starting to see more and more mainstream brands come in.
And I'd echo a lot of that, and I'd say it's about acceptance now, and how we develop our industry to an industry to the point where it's a viable option for sponsorship, etc., and lots of other revenue models. I mean, we're at a sports conference right now. We don't even know if esports is a sport right now. It's not on the official radar, apart from, as you mentioned earlier, Asia.
Well, we've got an Olympics now, don't we? Kind of.
Yeah. So I think it's really important that this year we really do professionalise and kind of solidify what our offering is, and also discuss with the sponsors, etc., about our different revenue models, because they aren't identical. There are some differences in terms of how revenue actually is funding esports. Yes, sponsorship is the same, but there's lots of other areas within the merchandising area which doesn't match traditional sports. So I would say acceptance and professionalism.
And even though you've been going for 20 years, it's still a very young industry, esports. I think it's fair to say that the esports companies are still finding their feet and working out what to do next as well. So it's not really a surprise that the traditional broadcasters are as behind as they are, particularly in the UK. I think we've had, 2 tournaments so far that won the BBC broadcast, but it was all broadcast online before they then moved BBC Three online. And I like to think that they moved BBC online because they saw the viewing figures for what they did with esports that would have been on BBC Three, and then Sky recently with the FIFA soccer tournament
and Katowice as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
and with Sky, they were getting. I understand they got decent viewing figures, even though they were showing it at 1 o'clock in the morning, quite a lot of the times. Is it a fear for you, Chris, that traditional broadcasters are going to take it a lot more seriously? Or have you got your money from Amazon now, so it's all good?
No, definitely not fear. I think it's definitely a great thing in terms of production value, right? I think esports production value has been good to date and has come a long way, especially in the last year. But it's fantastic to see the production value that these larger traditional broadcasting companies can bring to esports as a whole. And Twitch is very much a distribution platform for esports. So I think the viewers will appreciate it too.
Do you have opinions about the TV broadcasting? Absolutely. We're talking to broadcasters all over the world. We're owned by MTG. They've obviously got a very keen interest in what's going on in this space. The work we did with Sky locally, I think it was very topical because they produced a programme that was very apt for our existing audience to see how the existing audience would react. But it would also wouldn't alienate a more mainstream audience. The feedback they had on social media was tremendous. It was kind of the sort of 5% of people saying, gaming's not a sport, but the rest of them were just absolutely delighted to see broadcasters actually taking interest in their passion and something, their leagues that they'll follow day in, day out. So I think there's a huge potential there. But as Chris mentioned earlier, it's just a redefinition of TV, in my opinion. It's a broadcast it's a platform. It's Sky Go, sorry. That's a huge online platform that's working for traditional sports. So Twitch is an online platform.
I think it's true. I think a lot of the broadcasters haven't quite decided in what format they would broadcast it to get the best audience so far. Traditionally, it's a really live streaming dominated event. People really want to watch this stuff live. And we've done these live events and we've packaged up really nicely done highlights packages afterwards with all the best action. But the numbers for the highlights packages never get close to what you get for the live stream. So people really want to see stuff happen live, and they want to be able to interact and engage about it at that time. And I think a lot of traditional broadcasters would look at dipping their toe in the market with sort of packaged up highlight shows so they don't take over an entire weekend of content to broadcast an esports event. And actually that may not appeal so much to the audience, or maybe that is actually where the traditional broadcast model sits, and it sits alongside a Twitch or a streaming broadcaster that's carrying that live content and enabling people to sort of interact socially through the chat functions and so on while it's all going on.
And I personally think that the broadcasters are desperate to have video games on their channels, but they're trying to work out ways to do it. We released a documentary a couple of years ago that was simultaneously broadcast in 49 countries. Got blocked in the UK by Ofcom because we paid for it, but and esports is hopefully the way to do that. But is it not the same with viewing figures for live sport versus highlights of sport? I mean, excluding the fact that Match of the Day is on the BBC, so therefore has a naturally larger audience.
We announced a 24-hour channel, actual TV channel, that's broadcast on Viasat. So we're treading lightly, but we're testing the waters there to see how that helps. I think someone just needs to dive in and go for it, and we're here to help that. So I would hope to see it very soon, and we're keen, very keen, to find a solution.
Do you think that some of the Twitch casters are going to become the stars of it when it's on screen as well?
I'd say they're already stars on screen.
Of course, stars on the more traditional screen.
Yeah, for sure. I think when you look at Twitch Twitch is very much a community, and it's a community built out of other communities. So when John highlighted the social element, the social element to the broadcasts, and the esports broadcasts in particular cannot be understated, right? When you're experiencing the broadcast, you're not only experiencing what you see on screen, but also the chat, for example. You get to communicate with other people live, you get to experience their emotions, you get to share emotions with other people. And the stars you're referring to, on Twitch already, I think a really good example that there's a Polish commentator for Counter-Strike Global Offensive. For the last Counter-Strike Global Offensive major, it's a major tournament for Counter-Strike, essentially, a major part of our Polish audience tuned in to watch him commentate the broadcast. So they didn't tune in to the live stream for the production value and so forth. They tuned in to watch him to support their Polish team. So the strength of community really that kind of like pushes that through, and the stars are symbols of those communities.
I think a lot of people don't realise how big the stars on Twitch and the gaming-related stars on YouTube are. When you look at the YouTube stats around their most viewed YouTubers, I think that the stat I read for a year or so ago was 12 of the top 20 were gaming related in some way.
Yeah.
So these guys are huge personalities already. I think PewDiePie overtook Rihanna as the most viewed person on YouTube, and yet for a lot of people over 30, they probably never heard of him.
Yeah, the meet and greets that a lot of the YouTubers and Twitchcasters do, just hordes and hordes and hordes of kids queuing up to get autographs. It's like a Star Wars convention, but 10 times the size, and with a much younger audience. So this is one to discuss. This isn't really a question, but I just like this line. So, esports is for life, not just for Asia.
I think it's a bit of a misconception from a lot of people. Certainly, a lot of people we speak to around esports and competitive gaming. We talk about the overall size of the market, and they'll turn around and say, "Yeah, really, really big in Southeast Asia, isn't it?" And that's not true. Well, it's true that it is big there, but that's not the overall picture. I think it's been mainstream there for longer. So if you wind the clock back 20 years, you'd have found competitive gaming programs on national TV in South Korea, and gaming can be on the curriculum there, and people learning about it. But really, probably since Twitch was founded in 2011, and broadband speeds around the world started to improve, this has become incredibly mainstream globally. There's close to 5 million esports fans just in the UK. When we broadcast our events, the viewership is truly global. It's across Europe. Again, it depends a little bit on the game. If you're doing a console-based game, a Call of Duty, huge in the USA. If you're doing a PC game, Counter-Strike, Scandinavia, Eastern Europe. But it's a truly global phenomenon. And like we were saying earlier, it is completely mainstream for people of a certain age. So it's very much gone beyond where it was 10 years ago of being a Southeast Asian kind of phenomenon.
I think to add to that as well, I think if we look at, it's not just about the stadium events or these big, massive online leagues, it's also about the national leagues as well. We're running national leagues across the world. Brazilian leagues just started, Australian League, the UK Premiership, for example. It just shows that there is a lot of homegrown talent as well. So in terms of the larger ecosystem, it's it does localize very much, and we see the differences. And obviously, Chris just mentioned about Poland as well. It's all about what's happening on home turf, and those players will drag out their national flag when they walk onto the stage. And if there's the national supporters in the stadium, they go crazy. So I would say there's a huge amount of localization.
And Chris, what kind of percentages are you seeing on Twitch for viewers outside of Asia?
Outside of Asia? Well, Twitch, a large part of our audience is from North America and EMEA. And it's not just restricted to those two regions either. You've got Latin America, Russia. If you look at our site-wide peak concurrent viewership, we saw over 2 million viewers tuning in at the same time, which was the ESL Cologne event combined with the League of Legends finals. And that 2 million figure is global, right? And that's what we're seeing, really with every esports event. And just to pick up on James's point in terms of localization, I think one really important point to understand is that these communities have been mobilizing and creating tournaments, and esports has been around for a long time. I think what has accelerated that is really the ubiquity of broadband, so that accessibility to the content on multiple devices, and now they can tune in. And now that there are so many new revenue models around that, it's not a case of can you purchase tickets to my event and that's the revenue I have. There are so many different revenue models there.
Just to be clear as well, when you're talking about 2 million people, that's the peak concurrent viewers rather than the total viewers for the show.
So tuning in at the same time, yeah.
So it's a lot more than that.
And a typical tournament will go on for about 10 hours.
So it's a lot of eyeballs. Right, I'm going to open the floor, open to questions. Please don't be shy. Hurrah, we've got one. Excellent.
It feels a little bit, sorry, Toby Hester here from ESSA. It feels a little bit like deja vu. And for the older panel members, will remember back in the mid-90s when the digital revolution was taking place and everybody was saying, we've got all these people on the internet, we just don't know how to make money out of them. And it feels like the same questions being asked here. There are some clear commercial opportunities that are coming out, but the question that I've got is, what is the role that you guys have got for brands?
From a sponsorship side of things, would you say? Or
Yeah.
from a commercial? So it's connecting the brands with the audience. It's legitimizing what that product or service is and how that's applicable to our audience. So what we don't just slap logos all over the place. We try and build stories. We try and build the connection with the audience. So there's a lot of product placement and actual genuine usage from the influencers involved. And obviously, like any sports equipment supplier, it's the same thing within computing. The peripheral, the headset, the PC, the component, that all has a very big part to play. In terms of the non-endemics, I'd say it's about just kind of showing that that non-endemic brand will understand that audience and have something for them. If it's a good product or service, as you would expect, it will sell very well. So we're seeing a huge number of examples there, and that's really opening up in a big way. So it's partnerships rather than just sponsorship, I'd say.
The 98, 99% of your audiences are often are online.
Online, yes.
As opposed to an event.
Yes, absolutely.
That makes it really tough.
Yeah, we use video, social media, lots of other platforms to kind of put that message across. Even taking out personalities from the brands themselves and putting a face to that brand works extremely well. Or vice versa, putting someone from our community into that brand and talking that language, that works.
I think that's right. It's about providing access and reach to a demographic that's quite hard to reach via the conventional media, because a lot of these people, as you say, they're not going to traditional sports events, they're not watching regular TV. Now, esports as a whole, I wouldn't, it's not always just going to be online. You will see esports. Esports events will get bigger as spectator participation. The numbers will always be dwarfed by the number of people watching online and on sort of linear broadcast. But you're still able to reach them in a lot of the same ways, through live events, through product placement, as you say. You can create bespoke events that help brands target their demographic using particular games. You've got a lot of flexibility around how you can help sponsors reach those people. But what it does give you is access to a market that's very difficult for sponsors to reach via other channels.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple case of offering brands advertising opportunities, right? At the end of the day, and there's a whole range of advertising opportunities, whether it's simply purchasing media and connecting the brands to the audience, or whether it's a bespoke campaign that really kind of attaches the brand through some kind of organic creative concept. That is what we do, and really, over the last 2 years, traditionally, a major portion of our advertisers were game publishers, right? That made a lot of sense. But since then, we've seen a huge influx of non-endemic brands that are realizing that there's this engaged, organic audience on Twitch that wants to that can be reached.
Well, probably one useful point to add as well, because we are creating the broadcast and creating these events, we can be much more flexible in terms of the reach we give brands. So a small example, but quite pertinent, we had a clothing brand sponsor one of our events last year, and rather than just stick their logo on the stream, it meant we could film a feature piece about all the commentators and casters going down to their store, getting personal shoppers. We ran a competition for people to vote online around the best dressed caster, and it got a great social media buzz around it. So we have a lot more flexibility to be creative with the broadcast in terms of how we promote the brands, and you can actually do it in quite a fun way. So that wasn't seen by the community as being a really overt branding piece, but it worked really nicely for the sponsor involved.
Yep.
Hi, Chris Pinner from Synergy. Staying on the topic of how sponsors can actually get involved in esports, we've spoken a lot about how fragmented the environment is, so we've got lots of different events taking place, different locations, different games. I wonder to what extent any single brand or sponsor can actually take ownership of esports.
We've got a good example actually, but more from an endemic side of things, is Intel. Intel started a marketing campaign with us over 10 years ago. It's now their longest running online marketing campaign in history. They effectively own that whole event. It's quite unique in that respect, so it's very difficult to build that. But I would say consistency. If that brand appears over and over again, like Intel does with Intel Extreme Masters, run by ESL, sorry. It's how the audience sees that brand positioned within our fragmented audience, I'd say. So the fragmentation really comes from, well, what event am I watching? What tournament am I following? What league is it? Kind of a lot, and Twitch obviously has some competitors as well now, as well as a lot of us. So I'd say it's about consistency. It's choosing your game, working out what the long-term objective is, and sticking with it for a number of years. And that's what will get an ROI, I'd say. I think that's right. If you say, can we own esports? When you're talking about an audience of over 300 million people globally, for a brand to own esports, you'd expect to have to, I mean, you probably could if you were willing to commit the amount of money that would take. What you can do is you can create a very, very strong impression within a very targeted sector by, as James says, picking your sector, picking your game, picking the group of people you want to target, and then engaging with them over a consistent period of time rather than just doing a one-off splash at an event.
Chris, we're about to blow up, so if you can be very quick.
Yeah, just on your point of fragmentation, I believe within the next few years, I think that fragmentation will dissipate. I think while esports is made out of a lot of mini leagues at the moment, I think we'll start to see a few leagues really kind of grow and become the most dominant kind of leagues in esports. Yeah.
So thank you very much for coming today. I hope you've learned something. I certainly have, listening to you guys. So, and that's one of the beauties of it, is that the games industry is still learning about it as well. I'd also like to really thank the Telegraph for inviting a bunch of people from the games industries to come and talk at an esports, at a sports business summit about esports. Again, shows that we are more and more making an impression and becoming more mainstream. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.